In this video, I'm discussing pity parties, what they are, and the 3 common reasons why they happen. I know this is a really popular topic because my previous 2-minute video, YouTube video, and my blog post that I've written on my website on this topic have had the highest views of any other content, believe it or not. So definitely a popular one. I'm Jo Banks. I've been a professional executive coach for almost 15 years, and I'm sharing what I know. So let's take a deep dive into the world of pity parties. What is a pity party? Now, before we start, I need to absolutely come clean here. Pity parties have always played a huge part in my life, ever since childhood. And to be perfectly honest, the emotion behind them, to me personally, is the worst of all human emotions. Yes, I have very strong views on pity parties, but more on that in a little while. So let's take a look at pity parties. A pity party is when somebody indulges in extreme self-pity or feelings of victimization. They feel sorry for themselves and dwell on their problems, but without taking action to solve them. And that's the kind of difference that we're talking about here from a regular emotion and this feeling of victimization and, oh, woe is me, I guess is another way of talking about it. Now, to be clear, because I know some bright spark is going to want to misinterpret what I'm saying here, we can all feel sorry for ourselves from time to time, and that's healthy. It's a valid and normal human emotion. Disappointment happens, sadness happens, and we all have things that go wrong in our lives. We may even have periods, I know I certainly do, where things seem to keep going wrong no matter what we do or how we try to solve things. However, there comes a point when prolonged and pervasive experiences of feeling sorry for yourself or embracing a sense of victimization goes beyond mere passing emotion. When this emotional state begins to dominate and seep into every aspect of your personality, but yet you don't take constructive steps to address your challenges, that's what we label a pity party. In essence, it's a heightened form of extreme self-pity that goes beyond ordinary feelings of sadness or self-doubt. People throw pity parties for various reasons, such as feeling overwhelmed by challenges, experiencing rejection or failure, or dealing with personal loss. It's a common human experience to feel down and discouraged at times. But when this overwhelming feeling becomes chronic or prolonged, it can lead to a negative spiral of self-doubt and hopelessness. When someone throws a pity party, they may engage in negative self-talk and ruminate on their problems. They may also isolate themselves from others or seek out sympathy. Pity parties can be emotionally draining for the person experiencing them as well as for those around them. Now, while it's normal to feel sad or upset from time to time, wallowing in self-pity is not a healthy or productive way to deal with difficult situations. It can lead to a sense of helplessness and even worsen the problem. We all know someone who does this. And you know what? We may even do it ourselves. It's easy to spot someone in this type of state. Their shoulders are slumped, their head's hung low, their chin's jutting out, and their mouth is down. It tends to be kind of like a I even know people who huff and puff when they do this state. So think about how a child might react when you tell them that they can't have chocolate before dinner. They may pout, sulk, and generally act belligerently. That childlike behaviour is what's replicated during an adult pity party. It's almost like we're stuck at our 6-year-old self. Characteristics of a person in that mode tends to include having a what's the point attitude. They choose to only look at the negatives. They act and feel thoroughly defeated. They believe that nobody cares about them, despite the fact that there are probably many other people rallying around and giving them lots of attention. To them, everything feels hopeless. They struggle to see things from another, more positive perspective, even if it's right in front of them. It's them against the world. You'll hear someone in the throes of a pity party saying things like, "Why does this always happen to me? Things never get better. Why am I never getting a break? What's the point?" I call it the poor me syndrome. But that's just my phrase. I've coined that. It's not an actual syndrome, just to make things very clear. Now, again, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be sad, upset, annoyed when bad things happen. Of course we should. However, I do take great exception when people stay in that mode for a prolonged period, so much so that it becomes their personality. And I am sure you've met people like this. You might even be one yourself. Again, not casting any judgment, just trying to help. Now, again, this might be controversial, but in my experience, and I have had a lot of experience on this subject, I have never encountered anyone doing a pity party that wasn't using it as an excuse for not taking responsibility or not to take action on solving their problems. Why I hate pity parties. As I've already mentioned in a previous video, I had a difficult childhood. There were significant amounts of abuse and neglect, which I am now openly discussing. I'm discussing it more because I know from working with thousands of people that growing up with emotionally immature parents, even where abuse wasn't present, is far more common than you might imagine. Again, no blame here, just facts. If people knew better, they'd do better. In my childhood home, pity parties were a regular occurrence. I would often see my parents in a state of extreme self-pity. And even as a young child, it didn't make sense to me. I would think, well, that's not helping. Why don't they do something about it? It being the most current stressful, chaotic situation. Even as a very young child, I would go as far as to present my parents with ways to solve their problems. However, I was always really confused when they chose to ignore them. But more than that, it seemed that they would actually double down in their misery. Looking back, some of my solutions may have been really naive. I was a very young child, but at least I was trying to do something about it. And I really couldn't, for the life of me, understand why my parents weren't. After all, they were adults. Incidentally, I am very conscious now that it's unhealthy for a child to be constantly on edge and hyper aware of their parents' moods, not to mention their problems, let alone trying to solve them. I also know that there's a term for that role that I took on, trying to solve my problems, my parents' problems. It's actually called parentification, but that's another video and I'll cover that at some point, I'm sure. So that's why I hate pity parties. The people doing them tend to take no responsibility and assume with no evidence that they can't do anything about their situation. In my experience, that is rarely the case. In fact, what they're actually doing is practicing what we call learned helplessness. Why we practice extreme self-pity. There are several reasons why we do extreme self-pity. Number one, we don't want to accept responsibility. When we're in a pity party state, we tend to blame anyone or anything else other than ourselves for our circumstances. Friends, family, government, the weather, bankers, our employers, anything other than looking at ourselves. But of course, in most situations, we've usually played a role, and usually a significant one. However, it's far easier to blame someone else than take responsibility and acknowledge what we could have done differently. It's not a coincidence that there you are every time there's a problem. And I hate to tell you this, but you are the common denominator in all your problems. Now, when I first realized this, it really hit me hard when I first understood that as an adult, I was at the center of all of my problems. It was really sobering and took me quite a while to come to terms with. I won't lie, it was kind of what we call a dark night of the soul when I discovered that bit of wisdom. It really turned pretty much everything I'd learned from my parents completely on its head. It was really sobering. However, you can do a great reframe on this, and I love a good reframe. A reframe is where we purposely decide to look at a problem from a more positive perspective, as there are always at least two ways of looking at any situation. So, as the common denominator in all my problems, then it stands to reason that it also means that I have the power to change what isn't working. It's like, oh, the angels come out. More on that in the next video, because I'm going to do a part 2 to this one. So make sure you subscribe and hit that notification button so that you don't miss out. I'm going to go into depth on how you overcome pity parties. Number 2, learned helplessness and learned behaviour. We learn the majority of our behaviours and how and what to think in the first instance up to the age of 7. We do this by watching and copying our primary caregivers. So if one or both of our parents didn't model emotional maturity, there's a good chance that we won't either, because how would we know what that is? We're only exposed to one way of thinking when we're very young, and that's by copying our caregivers. I'll be honest, until I started doing the work, in other words, personal development, I would occasionally have pity parties too. Understandably, I modelled it from my parents, and believe me, that negative programming was really strong. However, it's only when I had that kind of dark night of the soul that I realised that I was the common denominator, and that as the common denominator, I could also be the one to sort them out. And that shift in my perception changed everything. Often, learned helplessness is passed down unwittingly from generation to generation until somebody actively decides to do something different. So, just because your parents behave and react in a certain way does not mean that you have to. Number 3, we get attention and validation. For many people, there is a significant secondary gain, or in other words, a subconscious benefit for not solving their problems. For as long as they have problems, they get attention and validation from others. Therefore, why the heck would they want a solution? I'm sure you know someone like this. They always have a problem or an issue, and you can give them all the recommendations or solutions under the sun for how to solve them, yet they choose to do nothing. That is secondary gain in action. These people can leave you so frustrated, a bit like my parents used to do, because you know that they could probably quite easily solve their problems. After all, you've probably given them multiple workable solutions, but yet here you are for the umpteenth time talking to them about them again. So let's look at this. In reality, they actually do not want your solutions. If they did, they'd have acted on them before now. What they want, however, is your attention and your validation. If they do happen to sort out their problem by some chance, you can guarantee that there'll be another one right behind it. I've talked more about attention and validation in a previous video, 5 powerful strategies for dealing with negative people, and I'll leave the link above and below in the description as well. The wrap up. Pity party is a term used to describe people who demonstrate extreme and prolonged self-pity. It isn't just a short bout of negativity following a disappointment or an upset, which is a perfectly normal reaction. Instead, it can often be pervasive and can take over a person's entire personality. It's often characterized by unwillingness to accept responsibility, placing the blame anywhere and everywhere other than themselves, learned helplessness, inability to take affirmative action on solving problems, attention and validation seeking from others. Having to deal with people who like to display extreme self-pity can be extremely challenging. And again, I do have some strategies to help you in the previous video, including offering empathy and understanding, setting strong boundaries, staying positive, offering solutions and support, and knowing when to step back. What next? If you recognise that you're prone to pity partying, in the next video, I'll discuss 5 useful tools to help you overcome unhelpful levels of self-pity. So remember to subscribe and hit that bell so that you don't miss it. And if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. It's such a small thing, but makes a huge difference. Finally, as always, thank you for watching. Thank you to everybody who stays until the very end, and enjoy the rest of your day.